In the bustling heart of Buenos Aires, a successful businessman named Gabriel Montero embarks on what seems like an ordinary day, only to find his life turned upside down by a chance encounter. While searching for the perfect anniversary gift for his wife, Gabriel crosses paths with a little girl who innocently reveals a mystery that will unravel everything he thought he knew about his life and past. As the story unfolds, Gabriel discovers long-buried secrets and confronts a shocking betrayal by someone he once trusted. What begins as a simple shopping trip spirals into a journey of redemption, justice, and new beginnings. Join us as we delve into a tale of unexpected encounters and life-changing revelations that remind us of the power of truth and the strength found in doing what's right, no matter the cost. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. The golden rays of the late afternoon sun streamed through the expansive windows of Buenos Aires' most opulent shopping center, painting elongated shadows on the gleaming marble floor. Among the lavish designer boutiques, Gabriel Montero, a 45-year-old businessman whose success was as striking as his sharply tailored Italian suit, moved with purpose. Each step echoed his relentless drive and ambition, the very traits that had propelled him to the pinnacle of the business world. He was heading towards the mall's most elite jewelry store, his mind racing as he sought the perfect gift. As Gabriel navigated the bustling corridors, his thoughts turned inward. Today marked his wedding anniversary, a day that should have been filled with joy, yet a palpable tension lingered between him and Sofia. Their once vibrant relationship had dimmed, and the distance between them seemed insurmountable. Desperate to bridge the growing chasm, Gabriel hoped that a lavish diamond necklace or a sophisticated white gold watch might rekindle the warmth that had faded. He was so engrossed in his thoughts, replaying their moments of happiness and heartache, that he failed to notice the tiny figure darting toward him. In an instant, a small force collided with his legs, snapping him out of his reverie. A soft gasp reached his ears as he looked down, finding a little girl, no older than 6, sprawled on the floor. Her brown hair was neatly tied into 2 pigtails, and her large brown eyes, filled with a mix of shock and innocent curiosity, gazed up at him. There was a fleeting vulnerability in her expression that tugged at something deep within him. "I'm sorry, sir," the girl stammered, quickly scrambling to her feet. Gabriel opened his mouth to offer a reassuring smile, but before he could speak, the girl's eyes narrowed, as if she was trying to recall a distant memory. Then, as if a light had turned on, her face broke into a radiant smile. "I know you," she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. "Your picture is in my dad's wallet." Gabriel's heart skipped a beat, his mind reeling from the unexpected revelation. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications he wasn't ready to confront. His picture in the wallet of a man he had never met? The statement struck him like a lightning bolt, stirring up a storm of questions and confusion. He had no children, at least none that he was aware of. So who was this little girl, and why did her father carry his photo? Just as the weight of the situation began to sink in, a voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Lucia, there you are." A woman in her 30s, her dark hair cascading in waves over her shoulders, rushed over. Her eyes, a mirror of the little girl's, widened in shock as they landed on Gabriel. "I'm so sorry, sir. I hope my daughter hasn't caused you any trouble." Gabriel scrutinized the woman's face, desperately searching for any sign of familiarity, any hint that might unravel the mystery before him. But her features were foreign to him. No memory stirred as he studied her. Yet, in her gaze there was something, an uneasy blend of nervousness and recognition, that made his heart pound even faster. The situation grew more surreal by the second, leaving Gabriel caught in a web of uncertainty and emotions he hadn't anticipated. "Thank you," Gabriel replied, his voice steady despite the storm of confusion brewing inside him. "Your daughter is delightful, but I must confess, she said something that has piqued my curiosity." The woman's face drained of color, her apprehension visible as if she feared what might unfold next. Gabriel bent down slightly, his usual stoic demeanor giving way to a growing need for answers. "Lucia, is that your name?" he asked gently. The little girl nodded, her smile bright and innocent. Could you tell me why you think you recognize me? Lucia glanced at her mother, seeking silent permission, before turning back to Gabriel. It's because Daddy keeps your picture in his wallet. Sometimes, I sneak a peek when he doesn't notice. He says you're a very important man. The air thickened with the weight of her words, leaving Gabriel feeling as though the ground beneath him had become unstable, ready to give way at any moment. His mind spun in a desperate attempt to piece together the puzzle. Who could this child's father be? Why would he carry Gabriel's photo? And what hidden truths were tangled up in this unexpected encounter? Lucia's mother, her discomfort evident in every tense line of her body, quickly took her daughter's hand. We really should be going, she said with a forced smile, her voice tinged with urgency. Please forgive us, Mr. Montero. But Gabriel wasn't ready to let them slip away, not without the answers that now seemed vital to his understanding of his own life. With a swift, determined motion, he pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and handed it to the woman. Please, he implored, his tone a mix of authority and quiet, underlying desperation. I would appreciate it if you could arrange a meeting with Lucia's father. It seems we have some important matters to discuss. The woman accepted the card with trembling hands, her gaze lingering on Gabriel for a moment before she nodded, turned, and led Lucia away, vanishing into the bustling crowd of the mall. Gabriel stood rooted to the spot, his thoughts racing as he watched them disappear into the distance. It felt as though he had unwittingly stepped into a maze, each turn leading him deeper into uncertainty with no clear path to follow. The reality of the situation slowly settled in. Whatever lay ahead, it was bound to alter the course of his life forever. The thought of an anniversary gift for Sophia was now completely overshadowed by a far more pressing mystery, one that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Gabriel's life. With a heavy sigh, he pulled out his phone and systematically canceled every appointment for the rest of the day. The situation demanded his full attention. He needed time to think, to investigate, and most importantly, to brace himself for the revelations that were surely on the horizon. A gnawing feeling told him that this seemingly random encounter with a little girl in a mall was just the first chapter of a much larger, more intricate story, one that would challenge everything he believed about his past and himself. That night, sleep eluded Gabriel. He lay awake in the darkness, Lucia's innocent yet unsettling words playing on a loop in his mind. Your picture is in my dad's wallet. The statement haunted him, each repetition sending a shiver down his spine. Who was this mysterious man who carried his photograph as if Gabriel were a crucial part of his life? And why? These questions gnawed at him, fueling a sense of dread and anticipation that he couldn't shake. Meanwhile, Sophia slept peacefully beside him, blissfully unaware of the emotional storm raging within him. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Gabriel slipped out of bed and made his way to his office, determined to uncover the truth. He powered on his computer and began a frantic search, sifting through old photos, meticulously archived documents, and newspaper clippings that bore his name. He scrutinized every detail, hoping to find a thread that could connect him to the little girl or her mother, but the effort yielded nothing. Frustration mounted as each potential lead faded into obscurity, leaving him with more questions than answers. In a moment of clarity, Gabriel decided that more direct action was required. He reached for his phone and called Renata, his assistant, a woman whose efficiency and discretion had made her an invaluable asset over the years. As soon as she picked up, Gabriel wasted no time. Renata, I need you to look into something for me, he said, his voice edged with urgency. Yesterday, at the Paseo del Sol Mall, around 5 p.m., I encountered a woman and her daughter. The girl's name is Lucia, and she's about 6 years old. I need to find out who they are, and most importantly, who the girl's father is. Renata, ever professional, responded with a calm assurance that momentarily eased Gabriel's tension. I'll get right on it, Mr. Montero, she replied, already beginning to mobilize her resources. But even as Gabriel hung up the phone, a sense of unease lingered. He knew that whatever Renata uncovered could change everything, and for the first time in his life, Gabriel Montero wasn't sure he was ready to face the truth. The thought of taking his elderly mother into his own homemade Simon shuddered with an instinctive revulsion that he couldn't quite suppress. He tried to mask his feelings, but a brief grimace flickered across his face. A fleeting expression that didn't go unnoticed by Mrs. Riley. The sight of it pierced her heart, leaving her feeling betrayed and deeply hurt. She had always believed that her love for Simon would be enough to hold them together. But now, the painful truth began to surface. "You know, I already have a buyer lined up," Simon said, attempting to shift the conversation away from the uncomfortable moment. "Dr. Harvey, a wealthy and well-known surgeon, has been eyeing this property for years. He's dreamed of living in this neighborhood, close to his clinic. It's not just a house to him. It's a dream come true." Mrs. Riley's heart ached as she listened. "Of course, that's why your father and I bought this place," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We always hoped you would move here with your family, that our grandchildren would grow up in this home filled with love." But Simon's face remained impassive, his mind fixed on his desires. "But I don't have a wife or kids, Mom," he replied, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "Why do we need such a big house for just the two of us? You've said yourself that it's too expensive to maintain. We can find somewhere smaller and more manageable." Mrs. Riley looked at him, her eyes pleading. "But this is my home. I'm used to living here. I don't want to move at my age. Please, Simon." "Mom, you have to be practical," Simon said, his tone growing firmer as he brushed aside her protests. "There's no point in wasting time. I've already made the arrangements. I found a place that I think you'll like. It's all settled." He forced a smile, but it lacked warmth or sincerity. "Now let's pack up. We need to go." Mrs. Riley's heart sank further, the reality of the situation crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "Can't we just talk a bit more?" she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper, still clinging to the hope that this might all be some cruel misunderstanding. But Simon's eyes reflected nothing but impatience and a desire to get things over with. He turned away from her, heading straight to the closet. Without a word, he pulled out the old suitcase she had once used for her business trips and began stuffing it with her belongings. "Simon, where are we going?" "The weather's terrible outside," she said, her voice laced with desperation. But her son ignored her words and focused solely on the task at hand. Up until that moment, Mrs. Riley had held on to a fragile hope that Simon might reconsider, that he might listen to reason. But as she watched him pack her life away with cold efficiency, she knew that hope was gone. She was being forced to leave her home, the place that held every memory of her life, every vestige of happiness. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. The few items Simon packed indicated that this move wasn't temporary. It was permanent. "Don't forget the underwear," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the sound of his hurried movements. Yeah, I've got it," Simon replied absent-mindedly, not even looking up. When the packing was done, Simon took his mother's frail hand, guiding her to the door without a word of comfort or reassurance. He helped her into his old, worn-out car, and the door closed with a heavy thud, echoing the finality of the moment. Mrs. Riley sat silently in the passenger seat as Simon started the engine, her mind numb with disbelief. As they pulled away from the home she had loved for so many years, she felt a deep, overwhelming sadness settle over her. This wasn't just a drive through bad weather. It was the end of everything she had ever known. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Renata replied, her voice professional but tinged with curiosity. "Certainly, Mr. Montero, I'll start on it immediately. May I ask what this is regarding?" Gabriel hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had always trusted Renata, but how could he articulate the unsettling mix of confusion and dread he was feeling, especially when he didn't fully understand it himself? "It's a personal matter, Renata," he finally said, keeping his voice measured. "Just get me that information as quickly as you can." As he waited for Renata's findings, Gabriel tried to immerse himself in work, hoping to distract his restless mind. But it was futile. His thoughts kept circling back to the encounter with Lucia and the cryptic words she had uttered. He began to speculate, considering outlandish possibilities that only deepened his anxiety. Did he have a twin he'd never known about? Or perhaps someone was using his identity in a malicious scheme. Each scenario seemed more far-fetched than the last, yet none could be entirely dismissed. The hours dragged by, and by mid-morning, Gabriel's phone finally buzzed. It was Renata. "Mr. Montero, I've uncovered some information," she said, her tone hinting at the significance of her findings. Gabriel's pulse quickened as he prepared himself for whatever she was about to reveal. The girl's name is Lucia Vasquez, and her mother is Camila Vasquez. They reside in the Palermo neighborhood. As for the father, Gabriel felt his breath catch, his entire focus narrowing to the next words Renata would speak. "The father is Diego Vasquez, sir, and here's where it gets intriguing. Diego Vasquez worked for your company about 10 years ago in the accounting department." The revelation struck Gabriel like a blow to the gut. Diego Vasquez, the name echoed in his mind, triggering a faint but elusive memory. How could he have forgotten someone who had once been part of his company? A sense of guilt mingled with his confusion. "Renata, I need you to gather every detail you can find about Diego Vasquez. His employment history, his current address, everything, and cancel all my appointments for the afternoon. This is something I need to handle personally." As he ended the call, Gabriel's mind raced. The name Diego Vasquez was now an anchor, pulling him into a past he had all but forgotten. The urgency to confront this mystery, to understand how this man and his family were connected to his life, consumed him. Gabriel knew that whatever he discovered next could have profound implications, not just for him, but for everyone around him. This was no longer just a curious incident. It was a thread unraveling the tapestry of his carefully constructed world, and he had to follow it, no matter where it led. As Gabriel closed the file, a sense of resolve washed over him. This mystery, which had crept into his life so unexpectedly, needed to be confronted head-on. There was only one way to do that, by speaking with Diego Vasquez face to face. With a newfound determination, he picked up his phone and dialed Renata's number once more. "Renata, I need Diego Vasquez's current address, and clear my schedule for tomorrow. I'm going to visit him, and I don't want any distractions." That evening at dinner, Sophia noticed her husband's distant demeanor, his thoughts seemingly miles away. Concern etched across her face. She reached out, touching his hand gently. "Gabriel, is everything all right? You've been so quiet tonight." Her voice carried a note of worry, and Gabriel felt a pang of guilt. He met her gaze, his mind racing with the implications of the secret he was keeping. Should he tell her? Would it be better to wait until he had all the facts? After a moment of inner conflict, he chose to offer a carefully crafted half-truth. "It's just a work issue that's been on my mind," he said with a reassuring smile, hoping to ease her concern. "Nothing you need to worry about, darling." But even as he spoke those words, Gabriel knew they were only a temporary shield against the storm that was brewing. He was on the verge of a journey that had the potential to turn his world upside down. The thought of meeting Diego Vasquez the next day filled him with a mix of anticipation and dread. It felt as though he was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to uncover a truth that might have been better left in the shadows. As the night wore on, Gabriel found himself replaying the day's events over and over in his mind, unable to shake the feeling that whatever he discovered in the coming days would not only alter his own life but also ripple through the lives of those he cared about. The secret that Diego Vasquez held, whatever it was, loomed large in his mind, and Gabriel couldn't escape the sense that by pursuing it, he was opening a door that could never be closed. The first light of dawn was just beginning to illuminate the Buenos Aires skyline when Gabriel Montero parked his car a short distance from the address Renata had provided. He sat in the car for a few moments, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he tried to steady his nerves. Never before had he felt such anxiety before a meeting. After a few deep breaths, he summoned the courage to step out of the car. The early morning air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within him. As he walked down the quiet street, Gabriel couldn't help but notice how different this neighborhood was from the world he knew. It was a modest, unpretentious place, where life seemed simpler. Laundry fluttered on balconies, children played hopscotch on the sidewalks, and neighbors greeted each other warmly as they shared mates on their doorsteps. When Gabriel finally reached the house, he stopped abruptly. The small, two-story home stood out with its freshly painted yellow facade and vibrant geraniums in the window boxes. It was charming in its simplicity, a stark contrast to the luxurious spaces Gabriel was accustomed to. For a brief moment he hesitated. Was he truly ready to uncover the truths that might be waiting behind that door? The fear of the unknown gripped him, but before he could decide whether to proceed, the door swung open. A woman hurried out, carrying a small backpack, and Gabriel's heart skipped a beat as he recognized her immediately. Camila, Lucia's mother. Trailing behind her was the little girl herself. Her face lit up with joy as she bounded after her mother. Camila froze in her tracks when she saw Gabriel standing there, her face draining of color. Lucia, however, reacted with unbridled excitement. "It's you!" she cried out, her voice full of delight. "The man in Daddy's picture." Gabriel managed a strained smile, trying to maintain his composure despite the tension crackling in the air. "Good morning," he greeted them, though his voice sounded rougher than he had intended. "I'm Gabriel Montero. I believe we need to talk." Camila seemed to gather herself, the shock fading from her features as she let out a resigned sigh. "I suppose we do," she replied, her voice soft but steady. She turned to her daughter, her expression tender. "Lucia, sweetheart, why don't you go play in the backyard for a bit while I talk to Mr. Montero?" Lucia's face fell, clearly disappointed that she couldn't stay for the conversation, but she nodded and skipped off, leaving the adults alone. Camila stepped aside, inviting Gabriel into the house. The interior was warm and welcoming, filled with the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee. It was a home that radiated love and care, and for a moment, Gabriel felt like an intruder in this peaceful space. He followed Camila into the kitchen, where she motioned for him to sit at a small wooden table. "Diego isn't home right now," she said as she poured 2 cups of coffee. "He works the night shift at a factory and won't be back until this afternoon." Gabriel nodded, taking the cup she offered but not drinking it. His mind was too occupied to appreciate the gesture. "Camila," he began, but she cut him off gently. "Please call me Camila," she said with a small, strained smile. "Camila," Gabriel corrected himself, leaning forward. "I need to understand what's happening. Why does your husband have a picture of me in his wallet? What is his connection to me?" Camila lowered her gaze, staring into her coffee as though the swirling liquid might hold the answers she sought. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "It's a long story," she said quietly, "and I think it's best if Diego tells you the full details himself, but I owe you at least some explanation." Gabriel's heart pounded as he listened, his senses heightened by the gravity of the moment. "Diego worked for you a long time ago," Camila began. "He always spoke of you with such respect and admiration. You were the kind of man he aspired to be, both as a boss and as a person." Gabriel frowned, struggling to recall Diego's face. How could someone who looked up to him so much have slipped from his memory? Camila's voice trembled slightly as she continued. "But something happened, something that changed everything. Diego never shared the details with me, but I know it involved some irregularities in the company's accounting." Gabriel's pulse quickened, a vague recollection surfacing in his mind. A tense meeting, raised voices, accusations flying. The memory was hazy but unmistakable. "Diego discovered something," Camila went on, pulling Gabriel back to the present. "Something that could have severely damaged the company and you personally. But instead of reporting it, he chose to protect you." The weight of her words settled heavily on Gabriel's shoulders. The revelation was staggering, as if the foundation of his understanding had suddenly shifted. Diego Vasquez, a man he barely remembered, had made a decision years ago that had profound consequences, and now that decision was circling back to him in ways he could never have anticipated. Gabriel felt the ground beneath him sway, the certainty of his world unraveling one thread at a time. Protect me from what? Gabriel's voice was barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air like a lifeline to understanding the magnitude of what Camila had just revealed. He resigned to avoid a scandal, Camila continued, her voice soft but firm. Diego took the blame for the discrepancies in the accounts and left without a word. He sacrificed his career, his reputation, everything he had worked for, to shield you and the company from the fallout. The silence that followed was oppressive, as Gabriel sat frozen, trying to process the gravity of what he had just learned. Memories that had long been buried began to resurface. Fragments of a surprise audit, financial figures that didn't quite align, and the sudden, unexplained departure of an accountant. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, yet the image they formed was almost too overwhelming to comprehend. But why? He managed to ask, his voice choked with disbelief. Why would he do something like that for me? Camila's sad smile deepened the ache in Gabriel's chest. Because he believed in you, Gabriel. He saw you as a good man, someone whose success would uplift many others. Diego didn't want a single mistake to destroy all that potential. He thought it was worth the sacrifice. Gabriel rubbed his face with trembling hands, the weight of the revelation crashing over him like a wave. I had no idea, he murmured, guilt and gratitude swirling in a confusing mix. I know, Camila replied gently. Diego never intended for you to know. He spent years trying to rebuild his life, without bitterness or regret. The photo in his wallet, it's his way of remembering what he gave up, but also of holding on to the belief that it was all worth it, that he made the right choice. Before Gabriel could respond, the sound of the front door creaking open echoed through the house, making both Camila and Gabriel tense. A male voice called out from the hallway, filled with the casual familiarity of routine. Camila? I forgot my lunch, so I came back to get it. As Diego Vasquez stepped into the kitchen, he froze, his eyes locking onto Gabriel's. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still as the two men regarded each other in silence, the past colliding with the present in a way that neither had anticipated. The room was charged with the unspoken weight of a shared history. Mr. Montero, Diego finally said, his voice thick with emotion and surprise, barely audible. Gabriel stood, his movements slow and deliberate, as if any sudden action might shatter the fragile reality of the moment. Extending a hand that trembled with a mix of emotions, relief, guilt, gratitude, he said, Diego, I believe we have a great deal to discuss. Diego hesitated only a moment before stepping forward and grasping Gabriel's hand. The handshake was firm, yet the emotions behind it were anything but simple. Gabriel knew, as he looked into Diego's eyes, that nothing between them would ever be the same. The secret that had been buried for so long had finally surfaced, bringing with it the possibility of forgiveness, healing, and perhaps even a new chapter in both their lives. Camila stood silently, watching the exchange with a deep awareness that she was witnessing a pivotal moment, one that would forever alter the course of their lives. In the backyard, Lucia's carefree laughter drifted into the kitchen, a stark contrast to the emotional complexity inside, reminding them all of the innocence that still existed, untouched by the burdens carried by the adults. Gabriel inhaled deeply, preparing himself for the difficult conversation that lay ahead. He knew that what Diego was about to share could shake the very foundations of everything he had built, but he also knew that he was finally confronting someone who had shown a level of loyalty and integrity that was beyond anything he could have imagined. Please sit, Gabriel said, gesturing to the chair he had just vacated. I think we both have stories that need to be told. And so, in that modest kitchen of a middle-class Buenos Aires neighborhood, two men began the long process of uncovering a decade-old secret. As they spoke, they were unaware of the full impact this meeting would have, but they both sensed that it would lead to a future that neither of them could yet fully comprehend. The revelation would not only transform their lives but also ripple through the company, affecting everyone connected to it. The small kitchen was engulfed in a tense silence, thick enough to slice through. Gabriel Montero and Diego Vasquez faced each other, the weight of their shared history hanging between them like an invisible force. Camila, sensing the heavy atmosphere, quietly excused herself, leaving the two men alone to confront the past that had drawn them together once more. Diego was the first to break the silence, his voice strained with emotions he had long kept buried. "Mr. Montero," he began, struggling to maintain his composure. "I never imagined I'd be explaining this to you face to face." Gabriel quickly raised a hand, stopping Diego mid-sentence. "Please, Diego," he said softly, but with conviction. "Call me Gabriel. After everything you've done for me, there's no need for formalities." A flicker of gratitude passed over Diego's face as he nodded, a small, weary smile tugging at his lips. Gabriel continued, his voice firm but carrying the weight of years of uncertainty. "I suppose you want to know exactly what happened 10 years ago." Gabriel leaned in, his eyes locked onto Diego's, searching for the truth. "Yes, please," he urged. "I have fragmented memories, but I need to understand everything." Diego took a deep breath, steadying himself before delving into the painful memories. "It was 2013, and I was working in the accounting department. One day, while going through some transactions, I noticed discrepancies in the accounts of one of our main suppliers." Gabriel frowned, his mind vaguely recalling the chaos surrounding a surprise audit that had caused ripples through the company at the time. "At first, I thought it was a clerical error," Diego continued, his voice growing firmer as he recounted the events. "But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that someone was deliberately manipulating the numbers, someone with significant influence in the company." Gabriel's heart pounded in his chest, fear and suspicion gnawing at him. Could it have been him? Had he unknowingly played a part in this? As if sensing Gabriel's inner turmoil, Diego quickly clarified, "It wasn't you, Gabriel. It was your partner, Alejandro Mendez." The name landed like a bombshell in Gabriel's mind. Alejandro had been more than a business partner. He was a friend, a confidant since their university days. Together, they had built the company from the ground up. How could Alejandro have betrayed him so deeply? Alejandro was siphoning funds into offshore accounts, Diego explained, his voice tinged with bitterness. Millions of pesos were disappearing through phantom transactions with fake suppliers. It was a sophisticated scheme, nearly impossible to uncover unless you knew where to look. Gabriel shot up from his chair, unable to contain the mix of shock, betrayal, and anger coursing through him. He began pacing the confines of the small kitchen, his thoughts racing as he tried to process the enormity of the situation. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice breaking with the pain of the betrayal. Diego lowered his eyes, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of the coffee cup in front of him. "I tried," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I scheduled a meeting with you to discuss the discrepancies, but Alejandro got wind of it. He confronted me before I could reach you." Gabriel froze, a sudden memory flashing in his mind. A meeting that had been abruptly canceled. Alejandro claiming he had fired an employee who was allegedly sabotaging the company. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one of deep treachery. "Alejandro threatened me," Diego continued, his voice trembling as he relived the fear of that moment. "He said that if I spoke out, he would pin everything on me, that he had the evidence to frame me, and he wouldn't hesitate to use it. He made it clear that I wouldn't just lose my job, I'd end up in prison." Gabriel sank back into his chair, the weight of Diego's words pressing down on him like a physical burden. The enormity of what Diego had sacrificed, the fear and isolation he must have felt, was almost too much to bear. But even so, Gabriel finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Why take the blame? Why not fight back? Expose him?" Diego met Gabriel's gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet but profound resolve. "Because I knew what it would mean for you and the company. A scandal of that magnitude would have destroyed everything you had worked so hard to build. The trust of clients, the reputation of the company. Everything would have been shattered." The truth hit Gabriel like a wave, the realization of what Diego had sacrificed washing over him. Diego had given up his career, his future, and even his freedom to protect the company and, more specifically, to protect Gabriel from a fallout that could have ruined his life. The loyalty and selflessness Diego had shown were beyond anything Gabriel could have imagined, and it humbled him to his core. Gabriel struggled to find his voice, the gratitude and guilt battling within him. "I don't know how to begin to thank you," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Diego shook his head, a bittersweet smile on his lips. "I didn't do it for thanks, Gabriel. I did it because I believed in you, in what you were building. I couldn't let it all be torn down because of one man's greed." Just then, the door creaked open again, and Camila re-entered the room, her eyes flicking between the two men. She could see the change in their expressions, the burden of the truth now shared between them. She quietly took her place by Diego's side, offering silent support. Gabriel looked at the couple, the weight of the past heavy in the air. But along with it, there was a sense of closure, of new beginnings. The secret that had been buried for so long had finally come to light, and with it, the possibility of redemption, forgiveness, and perhaps a future where trust could be rebuilt. "I think we both have a lot to discuss," Gabriel said softly, his tone now one of camaraderie rather than confrontation. "But first, let me make things right." As the three of them sat together, the sun continuing to rise over Buenos Aires, it was clear that the journey ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in a decade, the path was illuminated by the truth, and that alone was a step toward healing. Outside, in the backyard, Lucia's laughter rang out, a pure and joyful sound that seemed to cut through the tension, reminding them all that sometimes, the most significant actions are those taken for the good of others, without expectation of reward. As Gabriel prepared for the long conversation ahead, he knew that this moment was a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone involved. The future, though uncertain, held the promise of new beginnings forged from the ashes of old secrets. Hundreds of employees would have lost their livelihoods, and your name, your reputation, would have been dragged through the mud, even if you were completely innocent. Gabriel felt a knot tightening in his throat, as if the weight of Diego's sacrifice was finally pressing down on him. The enormity of what this man, a near stranger, had done to protect him and his company began to dawn on him, flooding him with a mix of shock and gratitude. "So I resigned," Diego continued quietly, his voice tinged with a somber finality. "I took the blame for the irregularities I uncovered. Alejandro made sure my standing in the financial world was obliterated. Since then, I've scraped by with low-paying jobs, barely managing to keep my family afloat." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen once more, pierced only by the faint sound of Lucia's innocent laughter drifting in from the backyard, a cruel contrast to the turmoil inside. Gabriel Montero felt his entire reality shift as if the ground beneath him had crumbled away. Diego Vasquez's confession had shattered everything he thought he knew about his company, his partner, and, most of all, himself. For several long minutes, Gabriel couldn't find his voice, wrestling with the overwhelming truth while Diego watched him with a mix of anxious anticipation and quiet resignation. Finally, Gabriel looked up, his eyes now filled with a fierce determination that had been missing for far too long. "Diego," he began, his voice unwavering despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "What you did, I can't even begin to express how deeply grateful I am, but I also feel an immense guilt. You've been suffering unjustly for years while Diego gently raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "You were protecting the company and all the people who depended on it." Gabriel shook his head, unable to accept Diego's absolution. Rising from his seat, he began pacing the small kitchen, his thoughts racing as he tried to make sense of it all. "No, Diego, this isn't right. I can't let it end like this. I have to do something. I will do something." Just then, Camila walked back into the kitchen, with Lucia trailing behind, curiosity gleaming in her young eyes. But her mother softly guided her towards the hallway. "Lucia, sweetheart, why don't you go play in your room for a little while? The grown-ups need to talk." Once Lucia had disappeared upstairs, Camila turned back to the men, her voice laced with worry. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes searching their faces for answers. Gabriel glanced at Diego, who gave a slight nod, permitting him to reveal the truth. Camila, Gabriel said, his voice filled with admiration and regret. Your husband is a hero. He has sacrificed everything. His career, his future, to shield my company and hundreds of employees. And I've been living in blissful ignorance, unknowingly reaping the benefits of his suffering. Diego took Camila's hand gently, his touch both comforting and pleading for her understanding. What are you going to do? She asked, turning her gaze back to Gabriel, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. Gabriel inhaled deeply, determination solidifying in his mind. The first step is to expose Alejandro, he said with resolve. I'm going to hire the best forensic auditors in the country. We'll dig through every transaction from the last 10 years. If there's any trace of his illegal activities, we'll uncover it. Diego's body visibly tensed, worry creasing his brow. Gabriel, that could be incredibly dangerous. Alejandro has powerful connections, far-reaching influence. And I have the truth on my side, Gabriel countered, his voice firm. Besides, I have something Alejandro will never have, your testimony, Diego. With your help, we can bring him down. Camila squeezed Diego's hand tightly, her eyes filled with both fear and encouragement. Diego, this might be our chance to reclaim everything we've lost. Diego hesitated, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions, fear of what could go wrong, and hope for what could finally be set right. But what if it doesn't work? What if Alejandro makes good on his threats? Gabriel stepped closer, leaning over the table so that Diego could see the conviction burning in his eyes. I won't let that happen. I swear to you, Diego, this time, I will be the one to protect you and your family. A thick silence settled over the room as Diego weighed his options. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a long sigh, a glimmer of resolve lighting up his eyes. All right, he said quietly but firmly. I'll do whatever it takes to reveal the truth. Gabriel smiled, a sense of purpose and righteousness washing over him for the first time in years. Good, he replied. Now we need to create a detailed plan. We can't afford to leave anything to chance. And so, over the next several hours, the modest kitchen of the Vasquez home transformed into a war room of sorts, a place where a battle for justice, truth, and redemption was about to begin. Gabriel picked up the phone, dialing his assistant Renata with a new sense of urgency. His voice was calm but firm as he instructed her to clear his schedule for the next few days. No meetings, no distractions. Instead, he needed her to quietly begin pulling together all of the company's financial records from the last 10 years. Discretion was key. This had to remain under the radar. On the other side of the city, Diego sat down with a worn notebook, his mind whirring as he painstakingly began piecing together the trail of fraudulent transactions he had uncovered all those years ago. Guilt had kept those details etched in his memory, and now they might finally serve a purpose. His eyes narrowed with determination as he wrote, each note a step closer to exposing the truth. Meanwhile, Camila busied herself with keeping Lucia entertained, aware that her husband needed complete focus. The little girl, ever intuitive, seemed to sense the tension in the air. She quietly colored in her room, occasionally peeking out into the hallway, her curious eyes catching glimpses of the serious discussions happening in the kitchen. Camila's heart ached with worry, but she remained steadfast, knowing her role in this was crucial, to protect Diego's peace of mind and to shield their daughter from the storm brewing around them. As the day wore on, a plan began to take form. Gabriel realized they would need expert legal counsel if they were going to dismantle Alejandro's web of deceit. He reached out to Martín Suárez, a friend from his university days who had since become one of Buenos Aires' most esteemed corporate lawyers. Without revealing too much, Gabriel outlined the situation. Martín agreed to meet the following day to discuss legal strategy. Relief surged through Gabriel. Having Martín on their side was a significant win. At the same time, a flicker of hope sparked in Diego's mind as he remembered something he had nearly forgotten. Before resigning, he had made copies of some key documents, evidence that could be pivotal in their fight against Alejandro. He had hidden them in a safety deposit box, listed under his brother's name, to keep them off the radar. What once felt like a futile act of self-preservation now seemed like a lifeline. As night descended over Buenos Aires, the three of them, Gabriel, Diego, and Camila, were physically drained yet filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The plan was risky, but it was solid. If all went well, they would expose Alejandro for the fraud he was, clear Diego's name, and preserve the future of the company. Just as Gabriel was about to leave, he paused at the doorway, turning back to face the couple. His eyes were heavy with emotion as he spoke. "I need you both to know something," he began, his voice thick with sincerity. "No matter what happens, I owe you both a debt I can never repay. Diego, your integrity and sacrifice have taught me more than any business deal ever could. And Camila, your unwavering strength in supporting your husband. It's truly admirable." Diego and Camila, overwhelmed with emotion, simply nodded, tears glistening in their eyes. Gabriel continued, his tone resolute. "Tomorrow we start setting things right. Together, we will bring the truth into the light, and we will see that justice is done." With those final words, Gabriel stepped out into the cool night air, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders that had been there for far too long. For the first time in years, he felt proud of the choices he was making. He knew the path ahead would be treacherous, but for the first time, he was ready to confront it head-on. Back inside the modest Vasquez home, Diego and Camila embraced quietly, their hearts a swirling mix of fear and hope. After 10 long years of carrying the burden of this secret, they could finally see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Upstairs, in her cozy room, Lucia slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that had been set in motion. It had been her innocent comment about the photo in her father's wallet that had sparked this entire chain of events, a powerful reminder that sometimes, the most profound truths are uncovered by the smallest voices. As the city of Buenos Aires drifted into slumber, for souls prepared themselves for a battle that would change their lives forever. The truth, which had been buried in the shadows for so long, was about to be brought into the light, and with it came the promise of redemption, justice, and the chance to start anew. In the days that followed, a whirlwind of relentless activity ensued. Gabriel, Diego, and Martín Suarez, alongside a team of dedicated professionals, threw themselves into the fight. They scoured documents, pieced together evidence, and prepared their case against Alejandro Mendez. With each discovery, the magnitude of Alejandro's fraud became more apparent, and the depth of his deception more staggering. Every new piece of evidence only fueled their determination to see this through. The fight was far from over, but for the first time they could see a path forward, a path that led to the truth. Meanwhile, Camila took on the burden of keeping life at home as normal as possible. She became a master of disguising the tension that now pervaded their household, shielding Lucia from the storm swirling around them. Yet, Lucia, perceptive beyond her years, couldn't help but notice the change. She often asked, with innocent curiosity, why her father spent so much time with the man in the photo. Camila's heart tightened every time she had to redirect the conversation, reassuring her daughter with a smile that belied the worry behind it. As the moment of confrontation loomed closer, Gabriel found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. He was burning with righteous anger towards Alejandro, a man he had once trusted, but who had betrayed him most unforgivably. The urge to expose him, to see justice served, was undeniable. But mixed with his fury was a profound sadness, a deep ache for the friendship that had been shattered. Years of camaraderie and shared victories now seemed tainted, the trust they had built over decades evaporating in an instant. Gabriel could hardly reconcile the man he had considered a friend with the criminal who had deceived him so completely. Then the decisive day arrived. Gabriel, determined to bring everything to light, called for an emergency board meeting. He claimed to have urgent information that would significantly impact the future of the company. Alejandro, completely unsuspecting, walked into the boardroom with his usual aura of confidence, flashing his trademark smile as he took his seat. But Gabriel, despite the adrenaline coursing through him, remained composed. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Once everyone was seated, Gabriel rose to his feet, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on him. His heart raced, but his voice remained steady and resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I've brought you here today because what I'm about to reveal will shake the very foundations of this company." For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Alejandro's face. He leaned forward slightly, trying to mask his concern. "Gabriel, what on earth are you talking about?" he asked, attempting to sound casual, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. Gabriel took a deep breath, steeling himself. "For the past 10 years, our company has been the target of an enormous fraud. Millions of pesos have been siphoned off into offshore accounts through a series of fabricated transactions with fake suppliers." The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief and shock. Alejandro's face turned ashen, though he quickly tried to regain his composure. "These are serious allegations, Gabriel," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. "I hope you have evidence to back this up." "I do," Gabriel replied calmly, gesturing towards the door. It opened, and in walked Diego Vasquez, followed by Martín Suarez and a team of forensic auditors. Alejandro sprang to his feet, his face a mask of fury and fear. "What is he doing here?" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Diego. "This man was fired years ago for trying to sabotage the company." Gabriel raised his hand, cutting through Alejandro's outburst. "No, Alejandro," he said, his voice firm but heavy with emotion. "Diego wasn't fired. He resigned to protect this company, and to protect me. 10 years ago, he uncovered your fraudulent activities, and you threatened him into silence." For the next 2 hours, Gabriel, Diego, and the legal team painstakingly presented their case to the board. They laid out document after document, showing the undeniable proof of Alejandro's elaborate scheme. They displayed graphics and forensic analyses that meticulously traced every fraudulent transaction, every peso that had been funneled into offshore accounts, and every deceitful lie Alejandro had spun over the years. The evidence was irrefutable. Alejandro, cornered and overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against him, went through a gamut of emotions: denial, rage, and finally, desperation. His once confident demeanor crumbled as he turned to Gabriel, pleading with him in a last-ditch attempt to save himself. "Gabriel," he begged, his voice trembling with fear, "we've been friends for decades. Surely we can find a way to settle this. I'll return the money, quietly step down, and leave the company. There's no need to drag this out into the public eye. We can make this go away, for old time's sake." Gabriel looked at the man who had once been his closest confidant, now reduced to a desperate shell of his former self. Pain and disappointment flooded his heart, but so did a fierce resolve. "I'm sorry, Alejandro," Gabriel said softly, but with unyielding firmness. "This goes far beyond you and me. It's not just about the money. It's about the people who trusted us, the employees whose livelihoods you put at risk, the integrity of this company. I can't sweep this under the rug. Justice has to be served." Alejandro's face fell, the finality of Gabriel's words sinking in. There was no way out now. The room remained silent as Gabriel's decision settled over them like a heavy fog. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock, betrayal, and reluctant acceptance. There was no doubt. Alejandro's reign of deception was over. The truth, once buried deep beneath layers of lies, was now exposed for all to see. As the meeting adjourned and the board members slowly filed out, Gabriel remained behind, standing at the window and gazing out at the city. The weight of what had just transpired pressed down on him, but alongside the heaviness was a profound sense of relief. The truth had finally come to light, and with it a chance for redemption, not just for the company but for himself. Back at the Vasquez home, Diego and Camila sat together in their small living room, holding hands tightly. Their hearts were filled with both fear and hope. After so many years of living in the shadows of this secret, they had finally taken the first step towards reclaiming their lives. Upstairs, Lucia slept soundly, blissfully unaware of the monumental shift that had just occurred. It had all started with her innocent curiosity, a small spark that had ignited a revolution. And so, as the city of Buenos Aires carried on with its usual hum of life, for souls quietly prepared for the next chapter of their journey, the battle was far from over, but the truth had emerged from the darkness, bringing with it the promise of justice, healing, and a new beginning. This is about doing the right thing, about correcting an injustice that has festered for far too long. Gabriel's voice echoed through the room, charged with conviction. The board members, still reeling from the revelations, looked at one another with somber expressions. Slowly, one by one, they raised their hands. The vote was unanimous. Alejandro was to be removed from his position immediately, and the company would fully cooperate with the authorities in the investigation. As Alejandro was escorted out of the building by security, his once confident demeanor replaced by a look of defeat, Gabriel felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. He had done what needed to be done, but the weight of the lost friendship still tugged at his heart. Turning to Diego, who stood silently beside him, Gabriel extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice laden with gratitude and respect. Diego grasped his hand, and for the first time in years, a genuine smile of relief spread across his face. It felt as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Alejandro Mendez's arrest reverberated through the business world like an earthquake. Headlines blared his name, detailing his arrest and the multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement brought against him. Gabriel's company, though shaken by the scandal, stood resilient. Under Gabriel's leadership, they emerged stronger than before, with newfound transparency and an unwavering commitment to integrity. True to his word, Gabriel made sure that Diego was not only exonerated but also honored. He offered Diego a high-level position in the company along with generous compensation for the years of injustice he had endured. It wasn't a decision Diego took lightly. After many long conversations with Camila, he finally accepted. For the first time in a long time, the future seemed bright again. The story of Diego Vasquez, the accountant who sacrificed everything to protect hundreds of innocent employees, quickly became a symbol of integrity in the corporate world. It was a tale of courage, a reminder that doing the right thing, no matter the cost, could lead to redemption. Lucia, once puzzled by the mysterious man in the photo, now understood her father's heroism fully. She couldn't have been prouder of him. One sunny afternoon, weeks after the dust had settled, Gabriel found himself standing once again at the doorstep of the Vasquez home. But this time, there was no tension, no hidden truths, just the warmth of a friendship that had been forged in the fires of adversity. As they all sat around the same modest kitchen table where everything had begun, sharing a meal filled with laughter and love, Gabriel reached into his pocket and pulled out something that had long been part of Diego's life. It was the old, worn photo of himself that Diego had carried in his wallet for so many years. Gabriel gently placed the photo on the table, among the dishes of homemade food and half-empty glasses of wine. "I think it's time I return this to you," he said with a soft smile. "You no longer need a reminder of what you sacrificed. Now, everyone knows the truth." Diego took the photo into his hands, his eyes reflecting the emotion he struggled to contain. He looked over at Camila, who smiled at him with pride brimming in her eyes, and then at Lucia, who watched the scene with wide-eyed curiosity. "You know, Lucia," Diego said tenderly, turning to his daughter, "this photo was the start of a great adventure. It taught us that sometimes, doing the right thing is the hardest choice of all, but it's always worth it." Lucia smiled up at her father, leaning closer to examine the photo that had held so much significance in their lives. "So, Mr. Gabriel is no longer a secret?" she asked her innocent question, bringing a wave of laughter that lightened the room's heavy atmosphere. "No, dear," Camila answered, brushing a gentle hand through Lucia's hair. "There are no more secrets, just new friends and new beginnings." Gabriel raised his glass, his eyes filled with gratitude and newfound hope. "To new beginnings," he toasted, "and to the courage of those who dare to do what's right, even when no one is watching." The sound of glasses clinking filled the small kitchen, a sweet harmony of celebration and closure. As they shared in that moment, Gabriel couldn't help but reflect on the incredible turn his life had taken over the past few weeks. The discovery of Alejandro's fraud had been a devastating blow, but it had also given him a rare opportunity to redefine his values, rebuild his company on a foundation of trust and honesty, and strengthen the bonds of friendship that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal. In the wake of the scandal, Gabriel wasted no time in implementing radical changes within the company. He reorganized departments, introduced new policies to ensure transparency, and created a culture where integrity and accountability were not just words on a mission statement, but principles by which everyone, from the highest executive to the newest hire, lived. The road ahead was far from easy, but Gabriel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The shadows of the past had finally lifted, and in their place, the light of a brighter future was beginning to shine. Gabriel wasted no time in transforming the company's culture. He established a robust internal audit system, ensuring that every financial movement within the organization was meticulously tracked. New transparency policies were implemented, unprecedented in their openness. Employees were empowered to report suspicious activities through a new rewards program that encouraged vigilance and integrity. Under Gabriel's leadership, the company's core value became integrity, and no one embodied that value more than Diego. He became the symbol of the company's redemption, a living testament to the power of doing what's right, no matter the cost. The story of Diego Vasquez did not tarnish the company's reputation as some had feared. Instead, it became a beacon of hope and business ethics, a tale of redemption that resonated far beyond the company's walls. Initially, the media had swarmed around the scandal, eager to sensationalize Alejandro Mendez's downfall. But soon, their focus shifted to Diego's extraordinary courage and Gabriel's relentless determination to correct the wrongs of the past. Investors, who had once been on edge, were now deeply impressed by the transparency and ethical standards the company had adopted. Clients, too, took note, renewing their trust in the organization. Within months, the company's stock not only recovered from the scandal but soared to new historic highs. Yet for Gabriel, true success wasn't reflected in numbers, market shares, or even the glowing headlines. No, his true success lay in the peace he felt deep within, knowing that his company now operated with honesty and integrity at every level. It was in the satisfaction of watching Diego regain his reputation and his career, of seeing a man who had once been unjustly cast aside now stand tall as a respected leader within the company. It was in the unbreakable friendship that had formed with the Vasquez family, ties forged not in business deals, but in the fires of truth and trust. As the afternoon wore on, and conversation flowed effortlessly between friends, Gabriel found himself marveling at the unpredictable twists of fate that had brought them all together. A simple chance encounter with a little girl at a shopping mall had set in motion a series of events that had forever changed the course of his life and the lives of countless others. It was a poignant reminder of how even the smallest actions can ripple outwards, creating far-reaching consequences no one could have foreseen. "You know," Gabriel said, breaking a moment of quiet reflection, "I think we've all learned something important from all of this." Lucia, ever curious, looked up at him with wide eyes. "What lesson, Mr. Gabriel?" she asked, her voice full of innocent wonder. Gabriel smiled warmly, searching for the right words to convey the depth of what he had come to understand. "That's the truth," he began slowly. "No matter how deeply we try to bury it, we'll always find a way to come to light. And when it does, it has the power to change everything." Diego, sitting beside him, nodded in agreement. He reached for Camila's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "And that sometimes heroes don't wear capes," Diego added with a knowing smile. He winked at his daughter, his eyes twinkling with affection. "Sometimes, they just carry a photo in their wallet." Lucia laughed, the pure sound of a child's joy filling the room, as she wrapped her arms tightly around her father. "My dad is a hero," she exclaimed proudly, her words ringing with absolute certainty. Gabriel watched the tender moment unfold, a sense of warmth filling his chest that had nothing to do with the wine they had shared. Yes, Diego was indeed a hero, but so was Camila, who had stood by her husband through years of hardship and uncertainty. And Lucia, sweet, innocent Lucia, whose simple observation had been the spark that ignited the entire journey. And perhaps, Gabriel mused, he had discovered a bit of heroism in himself as well. Not in the accolades and achievements of his business career, but in the moment he chose to confront the truth head-on and to make things right, no matter the personal cost. As the sun began to set over Buenos Aires, casting a soft golden glow over the small kitchen, Gabriel felt a profound sense of closure, but also of anticipation. This was not the end of the story, he realized. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter filled with possibilities, second chances, and the promise of a future built on solid foundations of honesty, integrity, and the courage to always do what was right. The photograph on the table, a silent witness to years of pain, sacrifice, and hidden truths, had transformed into a powerful symbol of redemption and enduring friendship. As Lucia picked it up and examined it with childlike curiosity, Gabriel realized that this image, once secreted away in the wallet of a brave man, now belonged to them all. Its true value wasn't in the secret it had kept, but in the truths it had uncovered, truths about courage, integrity, and the beauty of fresh starts. In that small kitchen, in a modest neighborhood of Buenos Aires, for lives that had been woven together by fate in the most extraordinary way, celebrated not just the end of an era filled with secrets, but the dawn of a new chapter. A chapter rooted in honesty, friendship, and endless possibilities. The story of the millionaire and the little girl who noticed a photo in her father's wallet had come to its conclusion, but its impact would continue to ripple through their lives and the lives of countless others for years to come. Every time Gabriel, Diego, Camila, or Lucia looked at that old photograph, they would remember the miracle of that chance encounter. A reminder that truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, always finds a way to the surface, and that the smallest moments can lead to the most profound transformations. As we wrap up this incredible journey of truth, courage, and redemption, we'd love to hear from you. What have you learned from this story? What message or lesson has resonated with you the most? Comment below and share one thing you've learned that you'll bring into practice in your own life. Your insights could inspire others as well. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you more stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.